Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City, here is Steve Malzberg.
One of the members of the Taliban, these detainees from Guantanamo, has already vowed to return to Afghanistan, return to the fight, and kill Americans. And the head of the Haqqani network who was holding him said, look, we have a pretty good idea here now. Let's kidnap more Americans. I mean, what do you say to the families of American soldiers that perhaps these guys could go back and kill Americans again?
All right, folks, that question was put to John Kerry, and he called it a bunch of baloney, that they would come back and kill Americans again. He said even if they tried to, we have people watching them, and it won't be easy for them to do it. Joining us now is our friend, the one, the only, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the host of War Stories on the Fox News Channel, and more importantly, New York Times best-selling author, and the new one is out, Counterfeit Lies. I hold it here in my hand. Colonel, great to see you,
Great to be back with you again. By the way, what we just saw was John Kerry in his finest moments.
He said nothing.
Totally clueless. Totally clueless.
Well, the administration is now saying when they are briefing the Congress privately, they're saying, forget what Kerry said, of course they're a threat to come back.
Yeah. And they're not only a threat to Americans on the battlefield. What they did in this administration, turning loose these 5 terrorists, who are the Fab Five of the Taliban, bloody, brutal, horrendous war criminals. These guys are already on the phone. They're not going to blow themselves up in a suicide vest. They send young boys off to do that kind of stuff. And that's what they're already doing. And so they're not just a threat on the battlefield. Because of the way they did this, every American traveling overseas right now is at risk of being kidnapped and being held for an exchange of some despicable Islamic radical somewhere in the world.
We're also finding out that the White House is kind of like putting the blame almost on Chuck Hagel, who's going to be testifying tomorrow, saying, well, Hagel determined that these 5 weren't as big a threat, were no threat to national security, that it was okay. He signed off on these 5, so that makes it okay?
Well, sadly enough, Chuck Hagel signed on to be the Secretary of Defense in an administration that is taking the finest military from being the most competent, capable, best educated, and combat experienced in history right down the sewer. And Chuck Hagel is part of that. He's part of the social radicalization of our military. He is part of taking us out of the fight. Somebody needs to stand up and say, you know what, if you continue this progress, we're not going to be able to get peace through strength. Our adversaries are going to come after us time and time again, and those adversaries are in places like Vladimir Putin's Russia, in China, North Korea, and certainly in Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. And Obama's going to empty Gitmo. He's basically said, "I'm going to do it, and try and stop me."
Steve, from the very beginning on this effort, when I was first engaged in it, met with the families, I've got right here in my pocket the bracelet that Bo Bergdahl's mother gave me when I met her. That's the bracelet, right?
Wow.
And I wore it for a number of years. Here's what I know. I know that Bo Bergdahl was never a prisoner of war. I know that he was a hostage. He was never held by the Taliban. He was held by the Haqqanis. The Haqqanis wanted money. The Haqqanis are the ones who traded the ambassador from Afghanistan to Pakistan, who they kidnapped.
Right.
For what? Money. They wanted money in this case. Somewhere along the process, the 5 Taliban Fab Five got added to the mix. Somebody also had to pay the Haqqanis. In other words, the separate deal with the Taliban couldn't tell the Haqqanis what to do.
Right.
And so the release of Bo Bergdahl was undoubtedly money.
A ransom, yeah.
So who? Who paid it? How much was it? Whose money was it? And quite frankly, why did you add the 5 to this thing when you didn't have to do it?
Yeah, very interesting questions, and the administration has denied that there was any ransom involved, but that just might mean that they themselves didn't pay it. They might have arranged for it to be paid. That's amazing, the bracelet, yeah. We had 5 American Special Ops Forces killed today in a friendly fire incident. I don't know anybody who's been in the trenches more than you, not only in your capacity as a lieutenant colonel, but also covering for Fox News and doing your war stories and your reports. How does something tragic like this happen without being specific to this incident?
And from what we know, and all I know is what we've seen in the news reports, you and I both seen the same thing. Apparently it's a misdirected, laser-guided munition. It happens. Terrible mistakes happen. I like to just remind everybody who's watching, that war is a terrible thing. terrible accidents happen in war. The one great thing about our military is when something like this happens, these guys, when they say a friendly fire incident, it's probably a rocket or a JDAM, laser-guided munition that went awry. Something failed in the system, but we acknowledge it. I mean, we're not going to bury that under the rug. Some of those kinds of events have happened. I mean, everybody remembers what happened early on in Afghanistan. But from my experience over there covering soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardsmen, Marines now in 57 embeds, this is a very straightforward. This is a terrible accident. It's not a green on blue. It's not intentional. Somebody didn't shoot somebody else.
It's a tragic mistake,
accident.
yeah, and that does happen. I want to get to the book because I do want to get to Hillary and some other things, and I don't want to miss out. I mean, this is very exciting. This novel is very exciting, and it takes us from a guy who's doing a job one day, he gets put on another case, and all of a sudden he's dealing with Hezbollah and all these terror groups. Talk about it.
This is the next grand fiasco from the Obama administration.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of truth to it, yeah.
Counterfeit Lies, the Obama administration. Because what it's about, I mean, look at it. You got Fast and Furious, the IRS enemies list, killing American citizens with so-called drone strikes. They're not drones, but forget that. Spying on Americans, threats to reporters like my good friend James Rosen, Benghazi, threats to Israel, the funding of Hamas, which we're now doing, Syria, Egypt, Ukraine, and the Iran initiative that they take credit for, the Snowden treason, the VA scandal, wait a minute, and Bergdahl. And so this is number 12. This is the next big scandal, because here's what the story is about in the short form. This is about how the Iranians are going to avoid, evade, and get around the international treaty that, as you and I are meeting right now, Steve, there's a meeting taking place in Geneva, Switzerland, with American negotiators and Iranians across the table, in which the Americans are telling the Iranians, here's what you've got to do on this agreement. We know you're going to get around it, but you got to do the following, or we can't get the French, the Germans, and the rest of these guys aboard on it.
Right.
It's the first time we've met privately with these guys with nobody else that we know of. And what's happening is right here in this book. This is how the Iranians are going to continue to build nuclear weapons and avoid the sanctions that they want lifted.
The fix is in.
And once again, this administration so wedded to an idea that they're willing to sacrifice American security and our closest ally, Israel.
I got this a couple of days ago. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's very exciting. So anybody who picks it up, you're going to love it. If you love what we're talking about, you're going to love this book, Counterfeit Lies by Ollie North. Now, how do you feel about what Obama's doing, opening military bases, now 3, the 3rd base, and dumping illegal children into these bases, setting up what one person said to me yesterday, they believe is going to be, it's like Palestinian refugee camps almost in the United States for these kids.
Well, look, one of the big problems that's in this book is what's happening along a very porous southern border. And what Obama has done is essentially say, I'm not going to enforce the law of the land. You know, part of his oath as President of the United States is to support and defend the Constitution and carry out the law of America. You know, I look at this and I say to myself, why hasn't someone raised the issue? Think of this, a Democrat who raised his right hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, actually suggests the idea that impeachable offenses are occurring in this administration for which there are no consequences. Why? I mean, we've got the first Attorney General in history to be held in contempt of Congress. You have the president who brags about his executive authority and abuses executive orders.
It was Republicans who went to Nixon and said it's over.
Exactly. Where the Democrats are willing to do that for this president and say, this has got to stop or we're going to oust you from your job.
I want you to hear very quickly. Let's play Hillary, number 44. Listen to Hillary.
I'm shocked that policy and politics are at work in Washington, but that's not what was going on. What was going on was trying in the midst of what frankly was the fog of war to figure out what had happened.
You famously said whether it was a protest or a group of guys walking out and deciding to kill some Americans.
What difference at this point does it make? That's right.
Does it make a difference?
In the moment, it did not. In the moment, what we had to be focused on was saving American lives.
Does it make a difference now? Do you want to change that? Do you want to?
No, I don't.
Whoa.
She doesn't want to change it.
Well, I'd like to change it because it does make a difference. And the reality of it is this Secretary of State, who's now got her book out in the street, who's bragging about her accomplishments, did one thing that no Secretary of State has ever
What's
done
that?
before. She not only burned up more jet fuel than any previous Secretary of State,
right.
she is the only American Secretary of State to ever visit Togo. That's her only accomplishment as Secretary of State.
And are you surprised she wouldn't take it back?
Run on that campaign.
That's what I said the same thing. Please run on that. Please. Ali,
Steve,
great to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure and an honor. And the book again, folks, Counterfeit Lies by the great Oliver North. And, of course, watch him on the Fox News channel on War Stories. And go to olivernorth.com and check out the whole website. And it's all Ali all the time. I like your tie. Tell your wife I love the tie.
It's a great-looking tie.
All right,
you can
thanks.
Tell she picked it up.
All right, folks, when we come back, we are going to have, you know it, you love it, you need it. It's Malzberg's Gimme 5, and I happen to be Malzberg. So stay tuned for that on the Steve Malzberg Show. Really, thank you.